Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Well, everybody, and welcome back. This is Pat Flynn. Today on Sunday School, we are going to talk about how to not worry so much, how to handle anxiety. We've done a couple of episodes on anxiety previously on the show. We've had a few specialists on to discuss as well. But I should like to think that I'm something of a specialist in this regard myself, since anxiety has been something that I have dealt with essentially for as long as I have any memory of my own existence. Now, before we get into the episode topic for today, I will simply say that we will be returning to our usual Sunday school programming. I know we still have to get caught up on the 10 Commandments in 10 minutes. We've gotten some really nice feedback about that. And I'm preparing a lot of new content for Sunday school, and I've also lined up some, I think, really cool and interesting interviews with some philosophers and theologians and stuff. But I felt like this would be a nice break from the usual routine, but also would make sense for Sunday school, because I'm absolutely convinced that so much of the problems we face in life, so much of our suffering, really offers opportunities for a greater amount of freedom and liberation. So there are deep spiritual lessons to be learned. Honestly, there are. And that's something that I've come to learn and appreciate. And especially for me, honestly, there are. And that's something that I've come to learn and appreciate. And especially for me in my journey in overcoming anxiety was, that all the stuff that I did on the cognitive side, the cognitive behavioral therapy, the rational emotive behavior therapy, all that, and we will discuss these techniques in this episode, useful, good. But if it wasn't for the spiritual part of it, I don't know. I just don't know if I would have been able to pull through. And I think perhaps all those are providentially connected and ordered for a purpose. Well, I guess I absolutely think that at this point. But the point I want to get across on this episode fundamentally is this. If you have anxiety, if you struggle with anxiety, and believe me, I know what it's like. I'm laughing because I'm thinking back to just how with anxiety. I mean, just constant regular panic attacks. I was agoraphobic for a while. So I was like Adrian Monk, except for even worse. I was more like Ambrose Monk, if you ever watched that show. I guess I always found the show Monk so funny because I could so relate to it. And Monk, of course, is that highly anxious OCD detective. That show was on maybe like 10 years ago or something, and I just loved it because Tony Shalhoub, who played Monk, he did I can't believe that he doesn't himself have anxiety, because he like got it all so well and he acted it all so well. So either he really does have this in real life, or he's just the best actor I've ever seen. But yeah, I was like his brother Ambrose Monk for a while, who just could not leave the house. That was me for almost a year. In middle school and high school were the kind of the peaks of my anxiety, when I really felt that just all of life was collapsing in. I could not get out of it. I was having very frequent and deep bouts of depression because of it. And indeed, depression is one of the kind of last stages of very high anxiety. There's different types of depression, but there's a specific type of depression that is linked to anxiety. That as you go through the deeper stages of anxiety, you will often hit, call it kind of spiritual fatigue, where you're just so fried, and you're from just constantly worrying all the time that your body just sort of shuts down and enters this depressive state because it just has no other option. So that is sometimes the last phase of the anxiety to set in. It can often be the most devastating and tormenting, as it was for me. But the good news is, once you start to reverse the process, that's also the first burden to lift. So my history of anxiety is severe, real, and long-lasting. I've struggled with this. What do you do? You do everything. You do every single thing that you can to try to alleviate yourself of this problem. And this isn't just true for anxiety. I mean, it's true for any problem that we have. And everybody has their issues. Let's remember that. It's easy to get on social media and to see these sort of pretend lives that people put up where everything just seems so perfect and so shiny and so glittery and so sparkly. But that isn't real life. That's not real life for anybody. And I hope that I've never given that impression to anybody. I certainly don't try to give that impression. I do my best to be as transparent and celebrate the things in my life that are going well and that I can be grateful for, but also be open about the things that I'm struggling with. And to be, very upfront. I have this new book coming out on Tuesday. Am I experiencing anxiety over that? Oh yeah, you bet I am. You bet I am. I stressed over, excited? Of course I'm excited. It's a huge ball of emotions. So yeah, we all have our issues. We all have our problems. This is the anxiety, the OCD. OCD is very commonly caught up with anxiety. And part of the reason is so much of anxiety is about wanting to maintain control. So you're constantly analyzing every little situation. You're constantly seeing what could go wrong. And then you try to gain control in every particular instance. And that's what leads to so much obsessive compulsive behavior. And this can manifest in any kind of way. And it's very interesting with people with anxiety how sometimes it will manifest in similar ways. There's that word manifest again that I hate using, but it always comes out of my mouth. But also will manifest, dang it, in many dissimilar ways. So, for example, anxiety runs in my family. So my mom has a severe case of anxiety as well. But the way that she has a severe case of anxiety as well. But the way that she would experience anxiety, and especially her kind of OCD tendencies, were vastly different than mine. It's very, very peculiar. So some people will try to control everything about their diet, or they'll try to control everything about their finances, or they'll try to control everything about keeping the counters clean, or germs, or whatever. Or sometimes, and very often, it's a combination of a lot of different things. That was my plight. It's just a combination of many different areas of my life which I was trying to gain control in, obsessively, unhealthily so. And the ironic thing, the sad thing, and the dangerous thing is that only increases anxiety. It might offer some temporary relief here and there, but then you set up all these parameters for control, and then what happens is you can't let go. You can't let go of these parameters of control because then that just increases your anxiety. So you only really dig yourself into a deeper hole the more you try to control every little detail of your life about the things that give you anxiety. Now, what does this sound like? Well, it sounds like that could lead into something like an eating disorder. And of course it can. And of course it does. And of course it did even for me, where I set up so many parameters of control with my eating and my nutrition because I just felt like I have to gain control of my health or I'm going to die. I'm going to have a heart attack. That was one of my biggest scares. Of course, when I was young, the first panic attack I had was in early middle school football practice. The first year I was doing sports, and I just thought I was having a heart attack. I had no idea what was going on, and I didn't figure out what was really going on until much, much later. So this, looking back, you see kind of the light at the end of the tunnel. This is what originally intrigued a lot of my interest in overweight. So I thought my heart was bad. Turns out I was just flooded with adrenaline and having panic attacks. So I started to just try to become as obsessive and healthy as I possibly could. And this did cause me to lose a fair amount of weight. Don't get me wrong, because I massively cleaned up my diet over the years. But it also caused me a huge amounts of emotional turmoil and stress that took me many more years to learn to unwind and overcome, to strike that healthy balance of eating healthy, eating for my goals, but being able to lift restrictions without a great amount of anxiety. That is freedom. That is freedom. When you have freedom from anxiety, you have the freedom to discipline yourself in times that it makes sense, to impose control when in times that it makes sense, voluntarily. But you also have the freedom and the ability to lift those controls without experiencing major amounts of grief or anxiety. If you can't do that, you have a problem, as I have a serious problem. And that's a problem that can be addressed and needs to be addressed, because that's not freedom. And what we want is freedom. We want to be free. We want to be free of these things. Now, can anxiety be cured? Can you be free from it? My answer is yes, absolutely. I mean, if I could have gone from a life where I could not have left the house or eat anything but a steamed piece of chicken breast and broccoli, to now I am, I don't want to say I'm out of the house more than I'm in it. Unfortunately, I'm in the house probably more than I'm out of it just by the work I do. But traveling all over the world, doing all the things I'm doing, offering all the talks that I offer. Do I sometimes get stressed and anxious by traveling and doing that? Yeah, of course. But I have the skills that it no longer controls me. It no longer overwhelms me. So in the sense of curing anxiety, I want to be very delicate with the language because I don't want to imply that you'll never get anxious again, that you'll never experience those anxious that you'll never experience those anxious feelings again. I don't think that's possible. What I know is possible and what I know can be done is you can build a new relationship with those feelings, that you can learn to respond to those feelings in a way that they're not so intimidating. They don't control you anymore. And once you do that, once you learn to reorient yourself and to respond rather than react, that's the key word, to respond rather than react to certain thoughts, emotions, sensations, and you practice that on a regular basis, then what will happen is your brain will stop feeding you so many negative thoughts. It will stop amplifying these negative thoughts, feelings, and emotions. The amygdala will start to cool down, and then you'll actually have less of them overall. So in that sense, you can cure anxiety. But will you ever be free of anxious thoughts in general, or feelings of worry? No, I don't think that that's the case. But you'll be able to respond to them in a way that you'll have freedom, that you will be making the choices, not your overactive nervous system. Okay? So why don't I just talk you through some of the things that were most helpful for me of overcoming this and getting my life in order, and the things that I still practice to this very day, and sometimes have to increase the practice of if I notice that I'm starting to fall back into some anxious tendencies. Now, let me be very honest here. This is a lifelong journey. This is a lifelong discipline. I know that if I don't keep up doing certain things to keep my mind strong, to keep my spiritual life strong, I will fall back into these anxious tendencies. They will come back. In the same sense of it's like exercise. If I don't keep doing the regular things to keep my body fit and strong, watching what I eat, then I will become overweight again. It's the same thing with anxiety. So there's no quick fix here. This is about serious lifestyle change. It's about developing the skills and the habits and the dispositions you need to free yourself from this. So, like I said, as somebody who has struggled with anxiety from the earliest ages that I can remember. I mean, I was never able to go spend a night at a kid's house because I just always had to be home. I couldn't sleep. I've had severe insomnia throughout the years due to anxiety. I mean, you name it, I've had it, and you name it, I've tried it. So I've saw the therapists, studied deeply, because when this is afflicting your life at that bad of a level, you will explore every possible avenue that you can. So it caused me to take deep dives into psychology, to study the human brain. It caused me to take deep dives into psychology, to study the human brain, to study the human mind, and it taught me a lot of stuff. I was searching for an answer to my problem, but I learned a lot of cool, neat stuff along the way. But everything from cognitive behavioral therapy to rational emotive therapy, even to hypnosis, big into that for a while. Meditation, many different forms of meditation, emotional freedom techniques, neurolinguistic programming. I mean, there's too many years and too many things that I've tried to even remember them all. And then, of course, the deep spiritual practices too, the prayer life. So what can I say about all of these? Some of them worked magnificently and some of them failed magnificently. And I can tell you that the three most important things that I do ongoing, here and now, to keep my anxiety, to keep me in a state where I can function as a normal person and not return to being a hermit or an agoraphobe, are the meditation, the prayer, and exposure therapy. Those are the three biggest ones. Now, I'm not going to say that I never got any benefit out of cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm just going to say that I got nothing as much out of that. I did that for years, would see a therapist for years, and we'd go through all these CBT techniques and REBT, which is rational emotive behavioral therapy. And trying to, change your thoughts directly is a lot of what that has to do. Just trying to force yourself to think a different way. I would see some results, but not a lot. Let's just say that the whole world of psychology was nowhere near as fruitful for my anxiety as I was initially hopeful about. And ultimately what I came to realize is so much of anxiety is the opposite of what I just described. If overcoming anxiety has nothing to do with the word force. And it's by forcing things that anxiety only becomes worse. The more you try to force is the more you try to control. And the more you try to control, the more this tends to increase anxious tendencies. So what I found is so much in the CBT and the REBT world. And look, if this stuff works for you and you're doing it, absolutely do not stop it. Do not let anything I say stop you from using these techniques. I'm just saying this. They had some marginal benefit to me, but they weren't the major breakthroughs that I eventually came to experience. And I think the key reason there is it was more about control. And look, I would sit there for hours and hours and just try and practice my thinking and try and change my thinking and focus more on, I know I'm thinking of it this way, but maybe I should think of it this way, and use words like possibly instead of always or definitely. Think of it this way and use words like possibly instead of always or definitely. And there's a lot of different things that go on to that. It can get very complicated and it can get very overwhelming. And I think that even for somebody like me who's very disciplined, it didn't produce the results I was hoping for. But I can't imagine how it would work for somebody who didn't have the time or the discipline to try these techniques. So I said I think the problem came down to force. And my biggest breakthroughs came from the meditation and prayer life, and by going in the opposite direction of force, which is acceptance. And there's really kind of a four-step process. I think I've shared this on an episode previously, but I'm going to reiterate it here. That prayer and meditation can do and help you do with anxiety, and that you can then bring into exposure therapy, which we'll talk about here in a second. That is the kind of final key. Meditation and prayer are preparation, and they're tools you can use in situations themselves if you want to overcome this. There's no getting around that. But it comes down to acceptance. And when any anxious thought or any anxious feeling, so there's what's causing anxiety. Sometimes it's a thought, sometimes it's a feeling. Now, typically thoughts lead to feelings, and oftentimes feelings lead to thoughts. But sometimes you have to kind of sit in a state of meditation and awareness and try and just figure out, okay, where is this starting? Is it starting with a feeling? Is it starting with a sensation? Is it starting with a thought? But then what you do is you don't try to change it. You just accept it. In fact, you do the opposite of trying to change it. You just, you note it. The noting technique is very good. It's a common meditation technique where you're in meditation, a thought comes up, maybe it's an anxious thought, and you don't try and push it away, you don't try to shove it away, you don't try to change it. You simply allow it to come and you note it. And you can note it with a quality, or you could just note it very basic, taking a couple deep breaths, and you let that thought pass away, and eventually it will pass away. And if it sticks there for a while, so be it. So the 4-step process is really not fighting. That's step one. Not running away from. So whatever you're having anxiety from, whether it's something internal or external, well, it's all ultimately internal, right? But it can be perceived as an external environment producing this internal turmoil. But you don't fight it. You don't try to change it. You don't try to manipulate it. You don't try to wrestle it. You don't try to force anything. You don't try to fight it. You don't try to run away from it. That's step 1 and 2. Don't fight, don't run away. So when you're in an environment, if you're not trying to fight it, somebody who's anxious will typically try to remove themselves from it. They'll try to get away from either the thought, the feeling, or the situation. Don't, because anytime you run away, it just energizes that negative anxious pattern. Anytime you run away, it just energizes that negative anxious pattern. So much of overcoming anxiety is kind of doing the opposite of what you would do intuitively. So, naturally something comes up. It's making me anxious. It's making me nervous. What do I want to do? Well, first I want to try and change it. I want to try and wrestle it, grapple it, get it out of my mind, or change something about the situation. No, don't do that. Again, it's only going to energize that pattern. It's only going to more deeply ingrain that pattern. Or if fighting doesn't seem like a viable option, there is flight. So there's fight or flight. You want to do neither of these. You want to do neither of these. What do you want to do instead? Well, instead of fight or flight, what you want to do, the word that I love is float. Instead of fight or flight, you float. What does float mean? Float is acceptance, meaning you're feeling all these radical, often overwhelming sensations come through. You're not fighting to do is you're going to float through them. They're going to come in, often like a tidal wave. What you need to do is sink into the feelings. Don't tell yourself to relax. If you tell yourself to relax, you'll just get tighter. Rather, think sink or sag into the feelings, into the situation. Take a deep breath and float with them. And float with them however long that they persist for. This is desensitization. That's the key. What you're doing by accepting and floating with these various anxious thoughts or feelings is you are training your body to desensitize. You're de-energizing those patterns. You're not paying so much attention to them, so you're telling your body, okay, this isn't as serious as we thought it to be or as we perceived it to be. And what will happen is both in the short term and the long term, these feelings will begin to diffuse. Now, not immediately. This takes a lot of time. Look, you spend a lot of time generating these dispositions, some time to reverse that. But it can be done, and it will be done quicker than you think. So rather than fight or flight, you float. Those are the 3 steps. And then the fourth one, and the most important one, is patience. You wait. You wait it out. You wait it out in whatever situation you're in, and you wait the feelings of anxiety out for however long you need. You keep floating. You keep accepting. Hardcore acceptance. And we call it radical acceptance. Maybe you're going to feel anxious for an entire day, maybe a couple of weeks, maybe a few months. In fact, for the nervous system to like fully desensitize from being in an anxious state, realistically about 3 months, friends. Realistically about 3 months. And it's going to come in waves. It's like progress in anything else, in strength, in hand balancing, in guitar. You're going to have some better days than others. It's just going to happen. And what do you do with that? You don't get anxious over it. You accept it. You float through those. You accept it. You float through those bad days. And it's the trend we care about, just like anything else. It's the trend of strength. It's the trend of weight loss. The minor fluctuations on the day-to-day are always going to happen, just as they do with weight loss, just as they do with strength. Well, same thing with anxiety. But you can trust that the process works so long as you trust the process and commit to the process. So that's the 4 steps that I'm leaving you with to begin healing your anxiety. Don't fight. Don't flight. Rather float and accept. Think sag into the feelings. Sag into... don't say relax. You know, the wording is important. If you say relax, you'll be like, relax, and then you'll just get tired. No, just sag or sink and float with it. And then wait it out. Wait for the feelings to pass. They will eventually pass, both in the short term. So like those immediate waves of high, in the short term. So like those immediate waves of high anxiety or even panic, those will pass in the short term. Your body's going to run out of adrenaline. Trust me, that's not going to persist. It might come back again in waves and you just keep practicing it, but it won't last. And then you continue to wait and you continue the practice for as long as you need until your body really does desensitize. And that's what so much of anxiety is. It's increasing levels of sensitization of your nervous system. And we need to unwind that sensitization. And this is the process to do that. Now, there's a few ways that you can practice this. One is in isolation. Now, this is an important and critical part of my book. I talk about isolation and integration. Now, this couldn't be more of my book, How to Be Better at Almost Everything. I don't talk about anxiety specifically in there, but I talk about skill development. And this is a skill. And when it comes to skills, you want to practice in isolation and integration. Now, isolation means you sit here and you practice it through the meditative state. You can practice your deep breathing. You can practice noting thoughts and floating through anxious feelings in a seated posture. I often practice up here in my attic. I have my little meditation cushion with all my prayer rope and everything there. I often do it in my car. So that's isolation. And you want to practice in isolation because that's going to, when you practice in a controlled environment, it's going to help you get a solid command of the technique that you wouldn't be able to get a hold of if you were practicing in an uncontrolled environment. But then you need integration, and that's exposure therapy. Then you need to go out and play the game of life. You need to go into situations that do make you anxious, that do make you nervous, and then you need to apply those techniques. You need to apply the noting. You need to apply not fighting, not running away, but floating, accepting, and patience. If you remember nothing else, remember acceptance. If you can remember two more words on top of acceptance, floating, acceptance, and patience. Floating, acceptance, and anxious situation. But you need to put yourself in those situations because it's not enough just to desensitize yourself when you're comfortably sitting in your attic or your car. You need to desensitize yourself in real life, in the situations that make you anxious. Now, the good news is there's a sort of a critical breaking point. And what I mean is once you do this enough out in the world, there's a kind of hinge point where you experience a sort of global release. So you might have difficulty in a couple situations that are really hard at first, but then once you get through those, once those break, almost everything else becomes easier. Like there's this sort of global release or desensitization. And for me, I remember it involved, it sounds so silly, but when I was young, just kind of like walking to a certain point, outside of my house when I was so agoraphobic. And that was extremely difficult. And my body would flood with panic, and I would just practice these techniques. I would float through it. But then once I did that enough, then, I got to the next level of challenge, which was just kind of like trying to get somewhere small, kind of outside whatever that original comfort zone of my neighborhood was. And I had to break through that, but that was less challenging. And then after that, there was this kind of global break or global freeing. And then I remember there was, a time not too long after in high school when I was able to just hop on an airplane and fly somewhere by myself. Now, people without anxiety are going to be like, no big deal, I fly all the time. Yeah, well, guess what? That's because you don't have severe, crippling, agoraphobic anxiety. For anybody who has severe anxiety, especially a fear of airplanes. Now, why is a fear of airplanes so big for people with anxiety? Well, aside from the fact that you're hurling through a metal tube 30,000 feet in the air, which seems a little specious itself, your lack of control. It is the utter lack of control. It is more so than it's not that you don't trust that an airplane can fly. Logically, that makes sense, but it's the absolute utter lack of control. There's just like no escape plan, right? And for somebody with severe anxiety, it's an utter nightmare. So that's why so many people have a fear of flying, especially if they're already anxious. But I remember just being able to get on a plane and I would just fly back and forth between places because I had this breaking point or this tipping point, whereas a year or two before, I would never, ever even have thought that something like that would have been possible. Even the thought of it, let alone doing it, would have given me severe anxiety. So it just goes to show you that you can have these radical transformations in something like anxiety, just as you can have radical transformations in something like weight loss or fitness. They do happen, friends. They are possible. And that always gave me hope. So I'll finish with that note. Is that when I saw people in fitness getting in shape and saw these transformation stories of people who radically turned their life around, that taught me that it was possible. Even if it was rare, it taught me that it was possible. And so long as I knew it was possible, I knew I would get it. Like that gave me hope because then I knew it was on me, and because it was possible that I could do it. Well, same thing with anxiety. At first, I didn't know what was wrong with me, and I didn't even know if it was possible to succeed and to overcome this. But then I would read these books and these programs, and I would meet these people, genuine real life people, who were doing these incredible things that they weren't able to do before, whose lives were radically transformed because they had literally overcome their anxiety. They had practiced these techniques. They dedicated themselves to it. Overcome their anxiety. They had practiced these techniques. They dedicated themselves to it. And seeing that it was possible gave me hope. And having that hope is so important. And if you're struggling with this and in a serious way, then I hope that's, if nothing else, I hope this is what that episode gives you. It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter how long you've struggled with this. There have been people who've struggled 50 plus years with severe anxiety their entire life and then overcome it. It's not a permanent affliction. It can be overcome. It can be managed. And what I've offered here are just some starting ideas, just some starting techniques. And I hope that you find it helpful. And then perhaps if you do, if you want to hear more on this, because it's kind of an off-the-wall episode, but if you want to hear more on this, send me an email and let me know, or leave a review on the podcast. That would be deeply appreciated. Those 5-star reviews really help the show. Let me know that an episode like this was helpful to you and you want to hear more. Don't run away. Float, acceptance, patience. These are the key starting points. And then also integration and isolation. So thank you for tuning in. We'll talk to you soon. Have a wonderful week.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.